This is Jonny Reps from Crash Love Gaming, and I'm coming at you today to give you a rant about a topic I've been meaning to talk about for a long time, and that is why and how Nintendo survives on nostalgia. So in order to prove this, first of all, what I'm going to do is provide examples of Nintendo relying on nostalgia. Second of all, I'm going to talk about why Nintendo relies on nostalgia. Then I'm going to show examples of how Nintendo is worse than other companies, other gaming companies in this regard. And finally, I'm going to explain why this is a bad thing long term. So without any further ado, first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to prove how this is the case with examples. Example number one, the average franchise age for each current gen console's best-selling titles. What I mean by this is I took the top list from Wikipedia of the best-selling games for each console, the Xbox One, the PS4, and the Wii U, and I took the average age of each franchise in which those games come from. For the Xbox One, it turned out to be 13.8 years, which is actually a little bit older than I thought they would be. I would actually think the Xbox One would be the victor in this regard. For the PS4, it was 10 years. The average franchise for each best-selling PS4 console game is approximately 10 years old on average, which is not that old, I suppose. It's about 2007, about the time Uncharted came out. However, for the Wii U, the average age of the franchise of each best-selling game is 22.8 years. That is almost as old as the combination of the average age of the Xbox One titles and the average age of the PS4 titles. So right here you see obviously a current-gen console that's reliant very heavily on older games, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because obviously Nintendo has been making consoles longer than Microsoft and Sony has. But we'll move on to point number two. Let's talk about Nintendo's innovations in hardware. Nintendo innovates in hardware, I would say, sometimes. The Wii was obviously innovative for its time. But then in other regards, you see that Nintendo, instead of moving with the times, they try and force their innovation upon you. Case in point, the Wii U was innovative. It just didn't really catch on. And then you have examples of things like the NES Classic. It's proof that nostalgia is a really fucking powerful factor in Nintendo gamers. And what I mean by this is, a lot of the games that were released for the NES Classic have been released on the Virtual Console. Nobody cared much. Then they released the NES Classic, and you can't find one of these damn things. They sold out everywhere, and they're so in demand because the look and the feel is so classic. It has the square rectangular controller with, basically it's just showing nostalgia is a really fucking powerful thing, and Nintendo kind of uses it as its root in its strategy. And like I said earlier, Nintendo is only really in favor of innovation if they control or create it. The Wii U being the perfect example of Nintendo failing to push its innovation. And the relation to this is Nintendo's refusal to stay up to date with stuff such as graphics, hardware, online connectivity, storage capacity are all proof of this thing. Nintendo likes pushing a gimmick or a new gadget that they think is cool or that they think is innovative, but they don't really like staying with things that actually are innovative. And we move on to the Switch. So I did something kind of interesting for this part. I found the list of every single announced exclusive title for the Switch. And in order to prove that Nintendo's strategy is still very much so rooted in nostalgia, I'm going to go through these titles, and they pretty much I was only able to classify them as one of three things: either a very old franchise that has yet another sequel, something that's almost basically considered shovelware, or there is one title, actually maybe two, that is a recent series that was created by Nintendo that actually they're making, this is good, they're making headway in this regard. So without further ado, here we go. Let's go. First game, 1-2 Switch. It's a mini game collection. Great. It's the Wii Sports of the Nintendo Switch. Then you have ARMS, which is boxing. It's basically Wii boxing made into its own game. Again, shovelware. BitBoy. The next game is BitBoy Arcade Deluxe. Doesn't even have a Wikipedia page, so I'm going to assume it's probably shovelware or something that nobody fucking cares about. And then next, Fast RMX. Sequel to a virtual console racing game in the theme of, what the hell were they called? Whatever. The point is, it's a virtual console game. It's probably going to be like $5 and nobody's going to fucking care. Fire Emblem, a sequel to a 27-year-old series. Fire Emblem Warriors, a spin-off to a sequel of a 27-year-old series. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a sequel to a 31-year-old series. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, a re-release of a Wii U game from a 25-year-old franchise, which in and of itself is a spin-off of a 36-year-old franchise. So you see how we're going here, right? New Frontier, Days of Founding Pioneers, shovelware. No More Heroes sequel. Okay, only 10 years old. This was for the Wii. The original game came out for the Wii, and this, I never played it, but this is actually something, a good Nintendo, good. This series is only 10 years old. Clap, 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 finally. Untitled Pokemon game. Again, a 21-year-old franchise. Seasons of Heaven, shovelware. Sold them Blooming Declaration. I have no clue what that is, but it's probably shovelware. Splatoon 2. Okay, finally, number 2. Another game. That's 2 out of 20. That's not bad, Nintendo. Actually, that's probably much better than the Wii U did. So Splatoon 2, you got another game that was recently, from a recent franchise. Finally, another one of those. So I applaud you, Nintendo. That's two applauses. That's the most applauses I've ever given Nintendo total. Story of Seasons, a Farmville ripoff. Bomberman R, a sequel to a 34-year-old series which might never come out. Super Mario Odyssey, another Mario game. Don't need to say anything else about that. Ultra Street Fighter 2, The Final Challengers, which is a re-release of a 23-year-old game from a 30-year-old franchise. Not really know why you would get excited about that one, but we'll see. And then Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which is from the 19-year-old Xeno series, which originally came out in, I think, 1998. So this long and arduous list has basically given me the means of showing Nintendo is not really changing their strategy too much in terms of their software. They're still doing the same thing. They're releasing remakes and shovelware. That's what the people hated the Wii U for. Remakes, sequels, shovelware. I don't see it. Why do I want to buy a Switch over whatever the Scorpio is going to be, or a PS4 Pro? I don't know, but more on that later. So I've already kind of established through all these game series that Nintendo keeps releasing, and the fact of the matter that their average game series, or average release from a much older series than the average high-selling release from other consoles, on top of the fact that all of these games that are getting released are just, old hat. It's old hat. It's nothing fucking new. PS3 released, I don't want to use it as by will, but Resistance Fall of Man was their big launch title for the PS3, and that was a brand new console, brand new series. They had something like Knack for the PS4. That was a brand new freaking series. What is their value proposition for people who aren't already Nintendo fans? I just don't see it. So why does Nintendo rely on nostalgia? Here's why. So it starts out, it's deeply rooted, right? I actually didn't know this before doing this rant and doing a little bit of research. When Nintendo originally released the NES, they released it with a toy robot and a gun, which now you can see where their affinity for gimmicks comes from. It started with their first ever video game console release. Back in the day of the NES, Nintendo controlled production of everything. They limited the number of games developers could release yearly. They produced their cartridges in-house. They controlled the content of their games for quality reasons, which back then was probably a really good idea because of the fact that the gaming crash of 1983, which I wasn't even alive for, I can only read about. But the fact of the matter is that was largely caused because of everybody was releasing their shitty game. I think Alpo Dog Food released their own game. Coca-Cola released their own game. Everybody had their own shitty game, and in 1983 controlling all this shit was a really good idea, and it gave Nintendo a lot of success to start out. But right now in 2017, it's not 1983, it's 34 years ago, Nintendo. So maybe reassess your strategy on that, on some of these controlled means of production. I'll get to a case in point about that later. As I mentioned earlier, Nintendo kind of like controlling change, not going with it. They kind of refuse to get with the times, all the while trying to push whatever they consider to be innovative at the time, sometimes in a failing effort, as we saw with the Wii U. My example is when Nintendo dabbled in smartphone gaming. At the end of last year, they released a Mario game where it was basically a fucking ripoff of Temple Run. And it was not even a good ripoff of Temple Run. Or maybe it was. I don't know. I didn't play it. But the point is, when Nintendo tries to get with the times, instead of pushing their manufactured innovation, they kind of tend to just do a shitty version of what has already been done. They don't really know how to go with change, only how to create and force their own change. So another reason why they kind of stick with nostalgia is because it's really all they have, if you think about it. Nintendo does not have third-party support on their console. For years, they have kind of struggled to attract third-party support, pretty much starting with the Wii, because of their, forcing people to use gimmicks, because of the inferior hardware, because of not getting up to date with the online capacities of modern consoles, and all sorts of other stuff, marketing themselves as being, alternatives. So a lot of big franchises that release on multiple consoles, they either had to release an inferior version on the Wii/Wii U or just not release one at all. And case in point about this third-party support is that Nintendo gave their giant list of third-party developers for the Switch. The thing about that is one of the big things, they're like, oh, Elder Scrolls Skyrim, but it's a re-release of a game that came out in 2011? 2012 maybe, I don't remember what year it was, but it's already like a 4, 5, 6-year-old game that they're re-releasing and trying to make it oh yeah, this is our moving to the future, we're re-releasing old games. Really? Okay. The other thing is, will third-party developers really be bringing their current, most up-to-date, and most recent releases to the system? That's what this begs the question of the fact that they're re-releasing Skyrim and making a big deal out of it. I'm going to say we're going to need to wait years to see this, but are we going to just get ports, older versions, inferior versions of games, or not at all like we have in the previous generations? Or are we going to get like the same quality as we're going to see on the other consoles? And to be honest, the fact that Nintendo has not released hardware specs on the Switch yet leads me to believe that the hardware specs are inferior and kind of shit. Most likely, we're probably going to see this trend continue into the Switch, and it doesn't seem like Nintendo's really doing too much to buck this trend, other than releasing a superficial list of like, hey, look at all these developers we're working with. Anyway, point number 3, they don't have graphics. They've been pretty much a full generation behind on graphics since the Wii. They don't have the strongest hardware in terms of power, as I just said. They have historically weak hardware, and there's no specs on the Switch. They aren't really positioned well in the market to have any other strategy other than appealing to nostalgia. When you think of Microsoft's gaming division, you think of the Xbox. When you think of Sony's gaming division, you think of the PS4. When you think of Nintendo's gaming division, you think of Zelda and Mario, not the Wii U, okay? Maybe they can change this with the Switch, but the way they are positioned, and the thing is that this is their fault. They put themselves in this position. It's not like it did happen over time, but it's kind of like they moved themselves into this position. It's not like it just happened overnight. You know what I'm saying? So point number 3. How is Nintendo worse? I mean, every company uses nostalgia in releasing, games. There's sequels. That's why sequels exist. That's why movies have sequels. That's why games have sequels. So how is Nintendo any worse than any other company at this? Number 1, it's, again, not saying that it's bad. I did say worse, but I'm not really meaning that it's bad. I'm more meaning that Nintendo their nostalgic use is much more focused and often and central to what they do than any other console. Stuff like the NES Classic, which I previously mentioned. The fact that the virtual re-releases don't do as good as the console, as the NES Classic console being re-released because of the look, and it's all like, it's superficial. It's superficial nostalgia that gives you that feeling of nostalgia without necessarily giving you anything, that people who aren't already Nintendo fans are actually going to like and appeal to them. Another point, how they're worse at this is all they advertise for their new consoles, for the Switch, for anything, is old stuff. They advertise a Zelda sequel, right, to a 31-year-old franchise that the Legend of Zelda franchise is, Mario Kart, and a re-release of Skyrim, like the 3 games that they're pushing for the Switch. None of those, to someone like me, who is not a Nintendo fan, did not grow up with Nintendo consoles, and just couldn't care less about Nintendo's proprietary stuff. To me, that is basically saying, this is our strongest reason for why you should buy the console, but it's not a reason that I care about at all. So my question for Nintendo would be, how would you court other people besides the people who are already fans of you to become fans of you? Good question. I don't know. I don't think they know. Also, as I mentioned, obviously another reason of how they're more, they use nostalgia more effectively and more stronger than either Sony or Microsoft is because of the age of their franchises, of their best-selling titles. For Wii U and previous consoles, 22.8 years of franchise versus 10 for the PS4 versus 13.8 for the Xbox One. It's obviously a lot. There's obviously a lot. Like I said, Nintendo has more history and more stuff to draw on, but they are also using that. They are using that and not much else. And regarding the Switch, I'd like to say I am not entirely unsold on the Switch. I'd like to say right now it kind of gets an at least you tried award, because it's kind of like, oh look, they're finally expanding their online play functions, but it's probably still not going to be very good, and they're making it paid right out the gate. And then it's like, okay, they have a genuinely cool concept with the hybrid system, but then it's like, oh, but their on-console storage is an issue. It's only 64 gigs, which is total shit. That's like launch PS3. They're like 2 generations behind with that. And also issues like frame rate on the mobile version, power consumption, the power of the system, how good is it actually going to be, in the fact that they haven't released any specs for it, right? Okay, so they're trying to get better third-party support, but it's probably not going to be current or up to snuff with other consoles, and they're really being vague with that. So basically what I'm saying with this is, Nintendo is kind of like taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. And even if they're taking 1 step forward and 1 step back, they're still going nowhere. So I see, like, in terms of like overall forward progress, I'm just not seeing it. I'm not buying it. I'm not seeing it. It's obviously where Nintendo is weak. So why is this bad long term? So first of all, as I said before, obviously it discourages new buyers from wanting to buy the Wii U, or not the Wii U, sorry. well, yes, the Wii U, but the Wii U, the Switch, even a 3DS, like, what does the Wii U / Switch offer to me that a PS4 or a PS4 Pro or an Xbox or an Xbox One Scorpio does not offer to me? It discourages new buyers, and it also forces Nintendo to not be directly competitive, and they know this. That's why they're releasing the Switch mid-life cycle of the consoles, and being very vague on the specs, because it's like, oh, it may be as strong as the PS4, or maybe better, but it's definitely not going to be, it's not going to be as strong as like whatever the successor of the PS4. It's probably not even as strong as the PS4 Pro, if I'm going to be honest with what I assume, and I know it's just an assumption, it could always be wrong. But it forces them to be uncompetitive. They're releasing it mid-life cycle in the console. They're releasing games at different times. I saw a good video earlier when I was doing some research about how Nintendo's production and release schedule in the US and in North America is kind of entirely different than most other game companies are doing. And the main reason is because they're trying to avoid direct competition. They're releasing this in March instead of around the holidays to avoid competition with the PS4 Pro last year, and the Scorpio if it's coming out this year during the holiday seasons. So why another reason why this is bad is because it makes they end up over relying on their gimmicks. So they're over relying on nostalgia. They're discouraging new buyers. They're forcing themselves to be uncompetitive, and they're over relying on their gimmicks. They're basically saying that if they have no new games that interest me, right, and their hardware is inferior, all they really have to people who aren't already Nintendo fans and going to buy that game anyway is the gimmick. And is the gimmick strong enough for me? Is the gimmick gimmicky enough for me? If the answer is yes, which it might be, for the Wii U the answer was obviously no because it was a failure. For the Wii the answer was yes. Will it be for the Switch? Will the gimmick be strong enough for the Switch? Maybe. But the fact that the console's success is reliant on whether the gimmick is gimmicky enough, that's not really something that encourages me as a discerning buyer to invest into it, especially when there's not any games on it that really interest me. So final point I'm just going to say is that basically what I'd like to call, or what I've seen called, the echo chamber effect, which is basically Nintendo's success is built on their old success. They dig into their old nostalgia base in order to move forward. So instead of trying to move with the times, Nintendo kind of tries to use their force innovation by force feeding you what they believe should be the next step in innovation, and pretty much ignoring or being slow to adopt what's already happened or already happening. And when Nintendo is forced to get with the times, they just do inferior retreads of existing tech, like how half-baked their online system has been, and how their storage capacity is lower, how they do Mario Run, which is a ripoff of Temple Run, or anything like that. Just how, like, the stuff they do is just not as like, even when they try to modernize it, it's always like 2 steps behind. So basically, so kind of what I'm saying is, it's like, if you'd like a good analogy, I thought of this analogy all by myself, so I feel really smart, but it's kind of like Nintendo is like basically a coal mine that wants you to believe that they're innovative just because they came up with a new way to mine coal, whereas other gaming companies are basically like various forms of clean energy, continuously moving forward and innovating with the times. So eventually, it's kind of like the echoes will dissipate, and Nintendo is eventually going to run out of Nintendo fans unless they build new Nintendo fans. Because it's only like you echo here, and then like, okay, maybe the Nintendo fans will introduce their kids to Nintendo products, and their kids will also like the Nintendo games, but maybe they won't. Where are the new fans coming from? I don't see it, because I'm not interested, so bleh. Anyway, so now that I have the informational part down, I'm kind of going to go to my rant. And I'm going to rant about this, and I have some bullet points. I'm going to rant intelligently because it's a bullet-pointed rant. Yeah, cool story. So here we go. Okay, listen up, Nintendo. Okay, Nintendo is a gaming company that I have no deep-seated love for, but I also have no deep-seated hate for them. So basically, I feel nothing for Nintendo because I didn't grow up playing Nintendo consoles. My fucking first Nintendo console was a damn DS in like 2006 when it was already a couple years old. And then I got a Wii, and I didn't play either for jack shit because they didn't have any games that interest me, okay? The game I played most on the Wii was Resident Evil fucking 4, which I already beat 6 times on the PS2. I'm not saying that the Switch is going to fail. What I'm saying is Nintendo's overall strategy is extremely unattractive to people who aren't already Nintendo fans. That's me, and that's a lot of people out there. So why the fuck would I buy a Switch as a non-Nintendo fan? Why would I buy a Wii U or even a goddamn 3DS over a PS4 or an Xbox One or a smartphone unless I already like Mario or Pokemon, or like their gimmick is gimmicky enough for me? The answer is I wouldn't, and I don't think a lot of other people would either. But this rant is not about the Switch. It's about Nintendo's overall strategy, which isn't for me. And is it for Nintendo fans? Okay, maybe it is, but even being a Nintendo fan is pretty fucking much identifying yourself as a relic at this point. It's like Nintendo hasn't been moving with the times since the Wii, which was released 10 damn years ago, and they were lagging, even at that point, they were fucking lagging behind. So to cap this off, I'm just saying basically, Nintendo, you don't need to court me. You need to court someone besides your fan base and casuals who will disappear overnight as soon as your gimmick isn't gimmicky enough for you anymore. Again, Wii fucking U. Watch the funeral of the Wii U. Yeah, it died, it's dead, it's gone. Anyway, they're gonna disappear overnight because you're not gimmicky enough for them. So basically what I'm saying is, Nintendo, you are going to run out of fucking coal eventually. Thank you. So, anyway, this is Johnny Reps from Crashlow Gaming. That's been my rant. It's probably a lot longer than it should have been, but I had a lot to talk about and a lot to get off my chest. So if you like the video, make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe to our channel down below, as I said, and follow us on all of our various social media. So thanks for watching the damn video. Here's our outro. And Stone Mountain 64, if you are watching, I want to collab with you. Yeah, I'm back to saying that. That's right. So this is Johnny Reps from Crashlow Gaming, and I am signing out. Subscribe to us if you're a fan of our rants or if you like good gaming content, and leave us some comments below if you like the rant or if you have any ideas for future rants or future content that you'd like to see.